Hello, good morning. This is the second lecture of week 6. So it's week 6, lecture 2. In this lecture, we're going to finish seeing the rose family, the Rosaceae, which we started last Monday. The lecture corresponds to Wednesday, May the 6th, 2020. Last Monday, we saw a general introduction to the family Rosaceae. We discussed in some details the diversity of fruits within the family and how the type of fruits that the different plants in the family have defines the subfamilies within the Rosaceae. So we'll discuss how it's important in the field to look at the fruits of plants in the rose family to help them identify at least to the level of the subfamily. We also did discuss important distinguishing traits of the family Rosaceae, in particular the presence of a hypanthium in flowers with 5 petals, 5 sepals, and a multitude of stamens, multiple stamens. Let me start the screen sharing again today to discuss the other 2 subfamilies that we still have to see within the family Rosaceae. So one very important subfamily is the apple subfamily. It's known as the subfamily Malloideae, or also known as the subfamily Pomoideae. It has both names. And Pomoideae because of the fruit, and Malloideae because of the genus of the apple, which is the genus Malus. The important traits in this family is normally leaves are entire. The flowers are typically rosaceous, 5 petals, multitude of stamens. But the important trait in this family is that the hypanthium is fused with the ovary. It's got a single ovary, 1 pistil. The hypanthium is fused with a pistil, and so all the other flower parts, the sepals, the petals, and the stamens come up, sort of are attached above the ovary. So it's the only subfamily within the Rosaceae that has a truly inferior ovary, and this defines the fruit it has, which I'm going to show you in a second. The fruit is a pome, and most of you will immediately associate cutting an apple in half and seeing this little line that many apples have between the internal part with the seed and the external fleshy part, right? This part here is a result of the growth of the ovary. This is the fertilized ovary, and you can still see that it has the shape of the bottle shape of the pistil, and surrounding it, what you will see is the growth of the hypanthium. So the tissue of the hypanthium, once the ovules and become fertilized and the ovary starts growing, they also start growing and become fleshy. That's in the rose hip also, but it's very, very attached to the ovary inside and the ovules. This is a similar apple with a transversal cut. You can actually see the carpels and the placentation that form it. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 carpels. And you can see also in this apple in particular, because of the cut, you can see the lines of the vascularization that mark the separation between the result of the outgrowth of the hypanthium and the result of the ovary proper. So this fruit, remember we saw it when we saw fruit, this type of fruit is called a pome. And as opposed to almost all other fruits that are the result of the growth of the ovary, the pome is a result of the ovary becoming fleshy, but also the surrounding hypanthium fusing with the ovary and also becoming fleshy. The plants in this family, apart from the obvious examples of the apple and the pear, are some important ornamental plants, the Japanese quince, Cenomeles japonica, and the European quince, or simply the quince, Sidonia oblonga. Quinces are somewhat tart, somewhat acidic to eat. They're not too nice to eat raw, like an apple or a pear. But having said that, they have an incredible aroma. They're very, very perfumed, and they make great marmalades and jams. So much so, as a matter of fact, that the word marmalade comes from the Portuguese marmelada, which in turn is the name of a jam made with quince. Quince in the Portuguese language is called marmela. So marmalade is basically quince jam. But for some curious reason of the ways languages and names are transmitted in the English language, we use it practically for any fruit jam or any fruit spread. One plant that you might see, because it's now, exactly as we speak at this time of the year, in late April, early May, it's ripe and all over Southern California, is the loquat, Areobotrya japonica. It's also a palm, and you can see it very well if you cut it, and during class we will cut one and do some dissection. But you can see that the flower parts are on top of the fruit and not below. The dead flower parts where the flower used to be are on top of the fruit. So the ovary is clearly inferior, and this yellow thing you're seeing is the hypanthium, the growth, the fleshy growth of the hypanthium. The family is economically very, very important. It has a diversity of apples that play a huge role in the fruit market in the United States and all over the world. An interesting story, the word pome, which basically means fruit, and more specifically apple fruit in Latin, gave origin to the mythology of the goddess Pomona, pictured here in a picture by Rubens, who was the goddess of fruit orchards and the goddess of fruits. And the history compiled by Ovid in his Metamorphoses is that Vertumnus, who was the god of seasons, the god that commanded the transition between summer, spring, winter, spring, and summer, and autumn and fall, Vertumnus really wanted to have access to Pomona's orchard, and Pomona didn't want him coming anywhere near, because Vertumnus had a command on the wild ecosystems of the forest, where winter would actually freeze everything and make the trees devoid of leaves, and she didn't want Vertumnus approaching her orchard. And of course, the story, it's a long story. You can research it. Eventually, Vertumnus does seduce Pomona and enters there, and as a curse, since then, all the fruit trees cultivated in the Mediterranean have to lose their leaves and freeze during winter, but they will come back with an abundance and a vengeance in spring and summer. From this nice story of Roman mythology explaining the eternal conflict between the cultivators, in this case Pomona, and people that gather from the wild, in this case Vertumnus, the name Pomona was chosen for a city in Southern California. We have it to this day, because it was expected during early colonization of Southern California that the place would become a haven for the cultivation of fruit trees. Now let's go to the last family, the subfamily Spiroideae, also known as the Spirea subfamily. You see the flowers, they're typical rose flowers, in this case in corymbs, in dense corymbs. The flower itself, if you look at it, has a typical 5 petals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It has a multitude of stamens, as it should. And then in the center, you can see, according to the species, one or many carpels. The main trait of the family Spiroideae is that the fruits do not become fleshy. It doesn't depend, none of the members of this family depend on fruit dispersers for the dispersal of the fruits. The carpels, if there are many that are normally free, will become dry follicles. Remember, a follicle is a capsule made by a single carpel, and the seeds will fly from the follicles. I took the trouble of writing a little section in the lecture notes following the series of text boxes that you will have seen already called Darwin in the Kitchen. This one is called Darwin in the Fruit Market. And it's basically a summary of a research done by a group of Chinese researchers, very brilliant, on the evolution of the fruits in the Rosaceae. It's always been a matter of wonder for people studying the Rosaceae, how diverse the fruits are and how similar the flowers are. You look at the flowers, they all look pretty much the same. You can tell a rose family flower immediately, but the fruits evolve into or develop into completely different things. And it's all a matter of Darwinian evolution, as a matter of fact, which is quite interesting. And if you look at it, you can understand the steps that led to the development of this diversity of fruits very well. The ancestral rose, which was inferred using molecular studies, it was basically a flower with a very flat calyx, an enlarged calyx, and multiple pistils. And it evolved initially, the first step was basically maintaining the multiplicity of pistils in this direction and enlarging the calyx even more, or maintaining the hypanthium but fusing the pistils. So the first step in the separation between or within the members of a family was really maintaining separate pistils or fusing the pistils into fusing the carpels into a single pistil, from initially a multitude of pistils, fusing all the one carpel pistils into a multi-carpel pistils. If you go here to the left, it's very easy to understand all the members of this branch belong to the subfamily Rosaceae. And the steps in evolutionary transition here were maintain the trait of multiple pistils, each one formed by one single carpel, developing a very large hypanthium that eventually becomes fleshy, and that in turn gave a fruit known as the rose hip. Now, in the other alternative, these other two started developing a central part of the receptacle, a central column known as the receptacle itself, and the pistils became attached to this central column. It still had the hypanthium, but all the pistils were attached in a central column. And then there is a big transition here in two. Here in this group, the fruits themselves, the pistils themselves, when fertilized, became fleshy to form little micro drupelets, and this gave origin to the raspberries. In this case, as a matter of fact, it was the central part of the receptacle itself, not the fruits, that became fleshy, and the fruits, like in the rose, stayed being dry, like little nutlets, like achenes, and this became the strawberry. On the right-hand side of this tree, you can see the fused carpels evolving into, here in option G, a set of fused carpels surrounded by a fleshy hypanthium that becomes also in turn fused with the carpels. So from the original flowers, the carpels become fused, and then the hypanthium fuses with the carpels to give a multicarpal fruit with a fleshy hypanthium, a pome. And this is the origin of the subfamily Pomoideae. In this branch here, the fused carpels, the multiplicity of fused carpels is simplified to one single carpel, to one carpel alone, that develops a bony endosperm, a bony endocarp, and the fruit hence becomes a drupe. So this is the pathway of the family Prunoideae. And lastly here, the multiplicity of carpels, or even one single carpel. I made here the illustration of the mountain mahogany of Southern California. It has only one carpel, but you can imagine this with many carpels too. It gives a series of dry fruits if neither the receptacle nor the hypanthium nor the pistil themselves become fleshy. What you will get is a series of dry fruits that are wind dispersed or water dispersed, and this gives us the family Spiroideae. So if you look at it from an initial flower that looks pretty much like the buttercup, and this is not by chance, the buttercups, family Ranunculaceae and the family Rosaceae are the two nearest families. The Rosaceae are the nearest family to the Ranunculaceae and vice versa. From an initial plant looking pretty much like an ancestral buttercup, you can see how very gradually the development of a hypanthium and the development of fleshiness in different parts gave origin to the four subfamilies that we have seen in this class. We're almost near the end. Some California genera. Rosa californica, the California rose. You can see here the 5 petals and the multiplicity of stamens and the stigmas here at the entrance onto the hip. It's a common wild plant. It grows in chaparral. It's also highly cultivated in the botanical gardens. You can see here a bumblebee. It's pollinated by bees and especially by bumblebees that love this wild rose. You can see that wild roses have 5 petals. Cultivated roses have some of the stamens transformed into petals by a mutation, and that's why they get this sort of whirl of petals that is very much appreciated by gardeners, but that is not by any means the wild condition. The blackberries, Rubus ursinus, very common in chaparral. If we would have gone to the field, we would have seen it, and you can eat it in Swarthmore Canyon. It grows very much all over our chaparrals in Southern California, and it's pretty nice to eat. You can see again the flower with the 5 petals, the multiplicity of stamens, and you can't see it, but there is here a receptacle with a multiplicity of pistils. The cinquefoil, very similar to the raspberry, although it doesn't become as fleshy as raspberries. Potentilla glandulosa, common in wetter areas, in waterways or ephemeral vernal pools, places where water accumulates in the mountains and hillsides of Southern California. A very important tree, Cercocarpus betuloides, the birch leaf or mountain mahogany. It's all over Southern California. It's not a hugely large tree, but it can reach up to 5 meters high, and the wood is hard and very nice. It's wind dispersed. It will produce a fruit that has a long plumose style that becomes into a dispersal structure of the fruit. The honeyleaf cherry, very common. It's cultivated in campus, and you will see it in the botanical gardens. You can see again the rose flowers with the hypanthium, and the fruit is a cherry. It's a very nice cherry. I mean, it's not as fleshy as cultivated cherries. The seed is large in relation to the amount of pulp it has, but it's eaten with gusto and fruition by animals that disperse it. And finally, in the subfamily Malloideae, Heteromelis arbutifolia, toyon, very common plant in chaparral. You can see the fruits that look like little apples. You can see the remaining parts of the flower here and the top of the fruit, because the ovary is inferior, eaten mostly by birds. Birds are the big dispersers of toyon, also very common in Southern California. And finally, I think, this is the last one, Adenostoma fasciculatum, known as chamise or common chamise. You can see the flower, typical rosaceous flowers. The leaves are small and scaly, and they form a central shrub in chaparral. The role is basically they belong to the family Spiroideae, the subfamily Spiroideae. They produce dry fruits. There's no goodies for animals, for human beings to be obtained from here, but they are incredible soil fixers and regulators of the water cycle. So that's basically all the plants in the family Rosaceae. Let me stop the sharing. This has been a fairly short lesson. In class, we will see this in more detail with microscopy, so as to complement this lecture with live plant observation and microscopy. And next Friday, the 8th of May, we are going to see the oak family, which is also a really interesting and exciting family. So thank you very much for your attention. We're getting there. We're almost finishing week 6. We're already approaching the end of this course. Thank you for your patience and your tolerance and your understanding. And let us try and make whatever remains of this, what remains of this course, make it fun and in as much as possible within our seclusion at home, an interesting learning experience. Thank you very, very, very